Hi, I'm Cole Worley, and today I'm going to teach you how to play my game, Root. Before we get started, I just want to note that everything in this video refers to the print and play kit that we've offered as part of our Kickstarter. Okay, let's get to it. Now, one of the things that makes Root a little easier to teach than other leader games is its use of shared concepts between all the players. So before we talk about setup and the individual roles, I want to say a couple things about those universal concepts. The first one is control. You control a clearing if you have the most warriors and buildings in that clearing. This control is called ruling. So if you have the most buildings and warriors in a clearing, you're considered its ruler. Now, because the Vagabond is not a building or a warrior, he can never control or rule any clearing on the board, and this will be important later. The next concept is movement. Now, when you move generally, you take a portion of your warriors, or the Vagabond piece, from one clearing and move it to an adjacent clearing. But there's an important restriction on this rule. If you're in control, if you rule the origin of the move, where the pieces are moving from, you can move to any adjacent clearing. However, if you're not the ruler, you can only move to places where you are, or where you have the permission of the ruler, or where no one is currently present. And remember, buildings count as presence. All right, the final shared concept is combat. Despite the use of dice, combat is pretty predictable in this game, and that's for a reason. The attacker has an advantage, and because you're spending an action to attack, you usually are going to make a return on that investment. Here's how it works. When you choose to battle someone, you roll 2d4 and treat that 4 as a 0. Now, these will be d12s in the final game, with repeated 0s, 1s, 2s, and 3s. When combat begins, the defender has the option of retreating. If they retreat, combat ends, and the defending army will take a penalty based on their army size. If they don't retreat, combat proceeds, and the attacker rolls the 2 combat dice. The attacker will deal hits equal to the higher result. The defender deals hits equal to the lower result. However, you can never do more hits than you have warriors. So, an army of 2 will never be able to do 3 hits, at least from the dice roll. Certain cards will provide ways of inflicting extra hits, and that isn't accounted for here. The last thing I'll mention about combat is the play of ambush cards. When a player is attacked, they have the option of playing an ambush card, matching the clearing of the battle. When such a card is played, the attacker immediately takes 2 hits, and then rolls the dice if any warriors remain. Attackers can play ambush cards too. If the defender attempts to retreat, the attacker can play an ambush card to increase the retreat penalty by 1 hit. Now, there are a couple other finer points to combat, especially when we get to the Vagabond, but I'll leave that for later on in this rules explanation. One of the last important elements that players will need to know before we get into the individual roles are the way cards are used in this game. Now, every card has 3 different features, and they're going to be used in different ways by all the players. First, every card has a suit. Birds are always treated as wild. Additionally, every card has a conspiracy listed at the bottom of the card. This is only going to really matter for the Woodland Alliance player. Finally, every card has an improvement which may be crafted. This matters for all of the players. So every faction has the ability to craft improvements. When you craft an improvement, you have to exhaust crafting buildings or crafting items of the correct clearing. So every card has a requirement. For instance, this card requires 1 fox in order to craft. What that means is that you need to have 1 crafting building in a fox location. When you craft a card, you tilt it sideways and place it in front of your player board and follow the instructions on the card. Mini cards have an immediate effect. For instance, this one places an anvil into play and scores a victory point and is then immediately discarded. If you're not playing with the Vagabond, you don't need to worry about putting anvils into play. But if you are, just take one of those item tokens and put it above your player board. If an improvement doesn't instruct you to discard it, it may be held onto your display for future turns and future uses. Crafting is a valuable way to get victory points in this game, and so it shouldn't be neglected. Speaking of victory, we should probably talk a little bit about the goal of the game. Root is won by the first player to achieve 40 points. Every faction has their own way of achieving those points, but all factions will get points for crafting, as instructed by those cards, and they also get points for eliminating a piece belonging to another player. So if you destroy someone's buildings, you'll get some victory points from that too. But the bulk of your victory points will come from your faction specialty. For the cat, they're trying to build buildings. For the Old Eerie Order, they're trying to build buildings across the map. They obey slightly different rules. For the Woodland Alliance, they're trying to complete Conspiracies. And the Vagabond earns victory points by gaining notoriety among the different factions. Now, getting up to 40 victory points isn't the only way to win. 4 cards in the deck are special victory condition cards. These cards each belong to a different suit, and they can be played like any other card in the suit. However, when they're played, they are not discarded. They're instead placed on the side of play. Any player can discard a card of that victory condition's type and can take that victory condition into their hand. If you have a special victory condition card in your hand, you can play it on your turn as a free action, just whenever you want. However, you can only have one in your play area at any given time. If a player has not declared a special victory condition, and they have one in their hand, on their turn, at any time during daylight, they can play that special victory condition. At this point, they'll remove their scoring token from the score chart. They will no longer track their victory points. They can only win the game if they fulfill their special victory condition. Each player's turn, no matter their faction, follows 3 phases. The first phase is Birdsong, followed by Daylight, and then ending with Evening. Each round begins with the play of the cat, and then proceeds to the Eerie, then the Woodland Alliance, and finally the Vagabond. During the Birdsong on the cat's phase, the cat will place 1 wood at every sawmill. If there are 2 sawmills in one clearing, there'll be 2 wood, and so forth. After that, the Daylight phase begins. The cat may take up to 3 actions each turn and can play additional bird cards to increase the number of actions they play that turn. The actions they can take are listed below. They can march, battle, build, recruit, and incite mob. Now I'm going to go through these kind of quickly, and if there are any questions, I urge players to look at the rules just so they can get a general sense. And we've already talked about movement and battling, so that should be pretty fast. To march, the cat makes 2 moves. You're never obliged to make the move if you don't want. When you battle, you initiate a battle in 1 clearing. You can also recruit. When you take the recruit action, you place a warrior at each recruiter. If you're out of warriors, and this is true of all the piece limits in the game, you're not forced to place them or remove them from elsewhere. You just don't place the excess. Each time you take the recruit action, the Woodland Alliance player will increase their outrage track 1 step. The most complicated cat action by far is build, and this is also the way they're going to score their points. The cat can build 1 building in a clearing they rule that has an available spot. This is important. They need to rule the clearing that they're building in. In addition, buildings have requirements. They cost a number of wood depending on their column, and you can find that listed on the player board. The requirements to build a building can be taken from any clearing that you rule, and can be traced through any number of clearings that you rule. So it would be possible to build a building here using wood from here, so long as you rule a path of clearings that connects the origin of the wood and the destination. You can and some of the buildings later in the game require lots of wood, and you could take that wood from several different sawmills as long as it fulfills that requirement. After you build a building, you score the points as indicated. Now, you'll notice, too, that under the recruiter, there's a coin symbol. When this coin symbol is uncovered, it will increase your income. So there's a good reason to get your recruiters out early. The final action available to the cat is to incite mobs. In order to incite a mob, they need to spend 3 cards of a particular nation. Then, in each clearing of the matching nation that you rule, remove every building belonging to the other players and score 2 victory points per building removed. Each player who removed a building draws 1 card for each removed building. After daylight's over, play progresses to evening. At this point, every player in play is going to draw cards equal to their income. At the start of the game, this is 1, but it will be increased through the building of different buildings. Finally, after you've drawn your new cards, discard down to your hand size. Your hand size is listed in the top right along with your base income, and for the cat is 5. All right, now play proceeds to the Eerie Dynasties. As might be expected from a highly asymmetric game, the Eerie plays a little differently than the other factions. The Erie's turn is powered by the decree, which is a set of instructions that faction has to follow. Every turn, this set of instructions gets longer, which means they're capable of more actions. But it also gets more complicated and can force them into awkward positions, and if they can't fulfill those actions, they fall into turmoil. During the Birdsong phase of the Erie's turn, they can either add one bird card to any column in the decree, or they can add 2 cards of any other suit. If they choose to add 2 cards, these could be placed in the same column or different columns. After they've done this play progresses to their daylight. At the start of daylight, the Erie is welcome to play any cards from their hand to reform. When they play a card from their hand to reform, they can take a card matching that suit in their decree and move it from one column to another, and they can do this as many times as they'd like. For instance, they could play 2 fox cards and move 2 fox cards from the second column to the third. After they've performed any reforms they want to do, we resolve the decree. The decree starts on the leftmost column and moves from the oldest card played, that'll be at the top, all the way down the column before proceeding to the next card. Each column is tied to a different action. The first column is recruits, the second column is movement, third column is battle, and the fourth column is the placing of new roosts. If an action cannot be taken, either because there are no pieces remaining or there are no valid places to take that action, the Erie falls into turmoil, which I'll talk about at the end of this section. Let's look at the actions. So the first action is to recruit. When you recruit, you have to recruit at a roost, and the location of that roost is dependent on the card in the decree. So if there's a fox card in the recruit section of the decree, you have to put 1 cube at a roost in a fox region. The next action in the decree is movement. This, like all the others, is tied to the location. If there's a fox card in the movement section, you would have to move at least 1 warrior from a fox clearing to any other clearing. Note that here the type of the card refers to the origin of the movement point, not the destination. After that comes battles. Like movement, each card in the decree triggers a single battle in the location of the card triggering it. So if that fox card were in the battle, you would have to fight a battle in a fox clearing. The final step in the decree is to place a roost. In order to place a roost, you have to control a clearing. And you have to be able to place that roost, like the other elements of the decree, in the location of the card that's triggering the action. So if that fox card were there, I would have to control a fox clearing and be able to place a roost in there. Now, what complicates this is the special rule, jealous fiefs. You can only have 1 roost in each location. Even if there are vacant spots, the birds will not tolerate having multiple roosts in one spot. Now, before we leave the decree behind, I just want to talk for a second about those viziers that you started with. The viziers are bird cards, and like all other bird cards, they are wild. And so getting bird cards on your decree is extremely valuable because it gives you a lot of operational flexibility. At the end of the old Erie's turn, they'll score their victory points, and then they'll discard a hand limit. The victory points they score is determined by the number of roosts that they have on the board. Now, if they couldn't perform one of their actions, they fall into turmoil. At this point, there's chaos in the court. All of the cards in the decree leave, except for the viziers. Then, a new regime is formed. Choose a new leader from the leaders that you haven't picked yet this game, and discard your old leader into a stash of unavailable leaders, so it doesn't go back into the discard deck. This new leader will determine how your viziers are going to be placed, and your turn immediately ends at this point. You will not score any victory points on turns that you collapse. All right, that's the old Erie. Let's talk about the Woodland Alliance. Now, while the cat player gains their victory points from building buildings, and the Erie gains victory points from having buildings on the board, the Woodland Alliance only gains victory points through cards. And they're going to play those cards on their 3 slots that they have beneath at the bottom of their player board. These 3 slots are only opened up if they have built the appropriate hideout. So if there's still a hideout on that mouse slot, it can't be used yet. During the Birdsong of the Woodland Alliance's turn, they will pick up any conspiracies that they had previously played. Now, unlike a lot of the other roles, which will discard cards as they spend them, playing conspiracies down to those slots doesn't necessarily remove them. During the daylight phase, the Woodland Alliance will spend cards and supporters to achieve actions. In general, when the Woodland Alliance spends supporters, it can only spend supporters from the forest nation that correspond to the clearing where the action is happening. All right, let's talk about the specific actions. The Woodland Alliance can spend one supporter to battle. This battle would take place in a location coded to the supporter that was spent. The Woodland Alliance player can spend a card in order to gain a supporter of that type of card. Remember that birds are wild, and you can use a bird to add a supporter to any of the Forest Nation boxes. The Woodland Alliance can also use bird cards along with a supporter to train a warrior of that nation type. So you could spend a bird card and a bunny supporter in order to add a bunny warrior to any bunny clearing. The Woodland Alliance can spend two supporters to build a hideout. These supporters have to come from the Forest Nation that's building the hideout, and the hideout can be played anywhere that there is a vacant slot. All hideouts, when built, come with a warrior. So two supporters will be spent to build it, one warrior will come from the stock. Remember that building hideouts is the way that the Woodland Alliance opens up card slots. The Woodland Alliance can also spend 3 supporters to build a stronghold. Strongholds can be placed in any clearing that the Alliance rules that has a vacant slot. One of the advantages of strongholds is that it increases your turn-to-turn income, as you can see by the icon beneath the built stronghold. The Woodland Alliance can also spend supporters to play cards as conspiracies. The cost of every conspiracy is listed on the left of the bottom of each card. When a conspiracy is played, it is placed in one vacant card slot. Remember, these vacancies are only opened after you build hideouts. The cost for placing a conspiracy has to be paid by the Forest Nation associated with that hideout. And after playing a conspiracy, resolve any icons or any text beneath that card. Most of these icons are pretty self-explanatory, and you can find a further explanation note in this print and play kit. One thing to note here is that the Woodland Alliance has no way to naturally move without the use of conspiracies. So conspiracies that allow you to move are valuable things. Finally, the Woodland Alliance is always welcome to play a card face down in one vacant slot. Like an executed conspiracy, this card will be picked up at the beginning of your next turn. This means that though the Woodland Alliance's hand size is only 2, by building their hideouts, they can functionally expand their hand size to up to 5 cards each turn. At the end of the Woodland Alliance's turn, you'll gain 1 supporter in each nation, and you'll also assign any bonus supporters to one of the 3 nations. Bonus supporters are gained through the outrage track, which increases whenever the cat takes the recruit action or whenever your hideouts are destroyed. It's worth mentioning here that the destruction of a hideout can be a serious setback for the Woodland Alliance. Though your outrage will increase, you lose half of the supporters in your Forest Nation, and any card that has been played in that hideout slot is immediately discarded. Finally, as with the other factions, you'll discard down to your hand limit. After the Woodland Alliance has finished his turn, play proceeds to the Vagabond, the final player of each turn. At the beginning of the Vagabond's turn, the Vagabond may make 1 movement, either from a clearing to another clearing or from a clearing to a forest space. This movement, called the slip, is taken without any penalties and without exhausting any boots. After making a slip, all exhausted items become available. Before we talk about the Vagabond's daylight phase, we should talk for just a moment about the way they score victory points. At the beginning of the game, every faction is indifferent towards the Vagabond. As the Vagabond does things for the various factions, the Vagabond will move their pawn on the alignment chart. The chart is a semicircle, with alignments on the left becoming more hostile and alignments on the right becoming more friendly. If the Vagabond takes an action that would trigger a movement on the chart, that movement automatically happens, and every movement grants a number of victory points as indicated. All right, let's talk about the daylight phase. So during daylight, the Vagabond is usually going to be exhausting items in order to take specific actions. For every boot exhausted, the Vagabond may take a single move. These moves, like the other players, can be from clearing to clearing. However, unlike the other players, the Vagabond never needs to worry about if it rules its origin. It can always move to an adjacent clearing. A torch may be spent to battle. Torches can also be spent to repair damaged items and make them available. to steal a random card from another player, but you can only steal if that other player is local to you, that is, they have pieces in the clearing where you're located, and if you have more combat strength than they do. Your combat strength, by the way, is equal to the number of swords that you have on hand. If there's a hideout local to you, you can aid. You gain a victory point, and the Woodland Alliance immediately gains one supporter in that hideout's type. You can also spend one of your torches to explore. Take a local rune token. Every rune token contains one item, which, like a crafted item, is immediately placed on the exhausted area to the right of your player board. It'll be available next turn. And you also get a victory point. Finally, if you're in a region with another player, you're welcome to give that player cards from your hand. The cards you give have to match the region where you're located, so bunny cards are only good in bunny clearings. But birds, like always, are wild, so they're especially valuable. And that brings us back to the alignment chart. You'll notice on the right that the first arrow, pointing to the next spot on the right, has a hand giving a card with a little 1 in it. This means if you give a player one card, you get to move along the alignment track, scoring some victory points, and if that player has crafted any items, so they have any items above their player board, you may take one item from that player. The next space on the alignment chart takes 2 cards. Only one item is gained, but the victory point bonus does increase. At the end of each alignment chart is a special status place, and there's a little icon in the bottom left and bottom right of those 2 end caps. On the friendly side, you will now gain 2 victory points in an item for every card that you give, so the prices kind of go back down, and you also gain the status of ally. When you're an ally, you are allowed, when you're moving, to take along any warriors belonging to your ally. These warriors can be led into combat and fight for you. The player controlling them has no opinion in the matter of whether or not you can drag their warriors around, as you're so charismatic that they have started to follow your orders and not that of their rulers. On the left side of the alignment track is the steal action. So if you steal a card from another player, you progress towards a negative alignment towards them. After that, you need to remove one of their warriors in order to further that negative alignment. The final step requires the removing of 2 warriors. And at that point, like the ally spot, you will get additional points for each warrior removed. Here, I want to direct your attention at the many lines that connect the full right side of the chart with the spot where you eliminate one warrior. If you ever eliminate a warrior belonging to a player that is not already your enemy, they then immediately become your enemy, and there are victory points associated with that shift. If a player is your enemy and is in 2 of those most negative alignment spaces, they are hostile to you, and in order to move into the regions, you have to expend an additional boot. If multiple players are hostile to you in a region, an additional boot must be spent for each hostile player, so it can get quite expensive. Finally, at the end of your turn, discard down to your hand limit. All right, that brings us to the end of an overview of play for Root. I hope this video provided you with all the instructions you need to hit the ground running. Further details, of course, can be found in the rulebook itself. I encourage you to leave a comment if you have any rules questions. Thanks, and enjoy.